I'm going to show you how to finish your cups and attach handles onto them. With wheel thrown stuff, it's really common for the rims to get very dry while the bottoms are still wet. They're always thinner at the rims and there's always more clay at the bottom, and there's usually water that's settled to the bottom. So as soon as you can, you want to get them off of the board that they're on and flip them upside down so that the bottom part can firm up. If you can, you want to be able to just pop them off of the wood board that you have them on. And I'm going to put it upside down. Let's see if I can get other ones to just pop off. That will give you the most clean finish on the bottom. These seem stuck, so I'm going to have to cut them off with my wire, which is a little tricky because the bottoms are pretty thin and you certainly don't want to cut up into the floor. You could wreck the piece doing that. So I really have to do a good job of holding this wire down super tight on the board and try and cut it off as low and even as possible. Don't let that wire come up in the air at all. And hopefully I've cut it pretty straight. I mean, there's just a slight slope of clay left on the board. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one off also. Just being really careful to hold my wire down low and tight and cut in one steady move. And it's a good idea when you're flipping pots upside down to put them on a clean board so that you don't leave crumb or scratch marks on the rims. And this board has a little bit of clay, dry clay on it, so I'm going to move them over to this clean bat and make sure that the rims stay as smooth and finished as when I was done throwing them. But this way the bottoms are up and open, and this more thick wet clay down there will dry quicker, and my rims are a little more protected. If the rims were starting to get anywhere near late cheese hard, I would go around the rims with a little bit of plastic, and I can just tuck some plastic around the upper portion of these cups so the rims don't dry out too fast while I'm waiting for the bottoms to firm up so I can trim them. This way you can get pieces that are more perfectly cheese hard all the way around at the same time. Getting the drying timing down just right with your cups can be a little tricky because you want them to be cheese hard for trimming, but not so stiff that you can't also attach the handle right away. The time to attach the handle is right when you're done trimming during the same work session. You want to trim it first and then attach the handle, because I wouldn't want to have a handle on the side of this going around and around on the wheel really fast while I was trying to trim the bottom. I'm gonna trim this one first, and I'm gonna start by just holding it out away from myself and looking at the profile of the piece. On this one, I kind of already have a little square stump at the base, kind of a somewhat defined foot to the bottom of this piece, and I think I'm just going to follow along with this design and maybe bring this bottom foot in a little more narrow and certainly smooth out that bottom sharp corner, but not change it a whole bunch. Before I attach it on here upside down, I'm going to feel it out with my fingers, and I'm feeling with one hand on the inside and one hand on the outside, how thick is it in the floor? How thick it is on the sidewalls? How much do I want to trim off? Where should I start and stop my trimming? So I'm getting this tactile thickness information logged into my brain, and I'm also getting a visual sense of what I want it to look like afterwards, and I spend a few minutes doing that, thinking about it, feeling it out before I attach it on here upside down, because once it's on here upside down, you don't see it in the same way and you don't feel it in the same way. To attach the cup, again, don't use a bat on the wheel head when you trim. Just attach it right on the metal wheel head. This lets you line it up on the rings that are on the wheel head, and the clay sticks really well just on the bare metal wheel head. I've lined up my cup, and I'm gonna press in on the sides with 3 lugs of clay. If the cup was centered when you threw it, and if you can just visually line it up on the rings on the wheel head, it should be pretty straightforward to recenter it upside down. Okay, I've got my cup attached, and I hold the trimming tool in my right hand with the handle of it coming up through the palm of my hand, and my index finger is right at the spot where the trimming loop goes into the handle. I get the wheel going kind of medium speed to start. Now my left hand is applying slight downward pressure on the bottom of the piece, and my left thumb is bridging over to my right hand. Elbows in, knees in, arms tucked in, slightly bent over. This is the starting position for beginning to trim. Have the wheel going first, then establish your starting position, and only then do you start to touch the clay. I'm going to come into the piece in this white knuckle grip, locked body position, and I'm going to start to hold the tool on that corner, really clenched steady in a total locked position. As the wheel goes around, I'm slightly moving my tool up and down, but I'm staying focused. Hold steady. And if you can manage to steal up over any chattering bumps that come your way, you should be able to trim a centered, kind of like a thin little hockey puck on the bottom of your piece. I'm going to go further inward, and I'm making this hockey puck more narrow. As I do that, it starts to leave a corner. I want to round out or curve out that step, that ridge that I've made right here. I'm going to switch to my larger tool to do that. I'm going to rotate this tool down across this section of the cup right here, and I'm trimming away some of the extra thickness. Hold here for several revolutions. Make sure your hand is steady, and then rotate that tool downward, trimming off the extra clay and completing this bottom curved part of your cup. Leaning back and taking a look at this cup, it seems to me I can make the foot a little bit more narrow. I don't want to make it too narrow, it could be unstable, but I think I can bring this in a little bit more. I'm going to hold this tool here again in the same position I was before, at the 3 o'clock position, coming in on the side of this bottom stump area, and I'm taking off about another 1/4 to 1/2 inch. I'm going to switch to the larger tool and round off that square corner that was created, getting rid of some extra thickness that was there and making this rounded shape at the bottom part of my cup. I'm feeling the walls in this area, and I'm trying to press in with my fingers to get a sense through how much the wall flexes right here under the pressure from my fingers, how much thickness is left. I can start to actually push it in and flex it. I know that I'm getting near to the thinness that I want. Maybe I could just shave over it one more time, and that'll be it. Now I'm going to do some trimming on this flat area. Here I'm going to start with the square tip of the trimming tool at the bullseye point. And I'm going to pause here for a moment and make sure that my whole upper body is stable and my hand is able to hold the tool in a stable way. Start here in the bullseye, coming across at 3 o'clock, gently release pressure as you come to the edge. As I come across, I'm going to start to take slightly more clay away from the inside part of this circle. I want this floor area to be slightly concave. I want it to be somewhat lower here in the middle than it is out here on the edge. I want it to be slightly dipped in. That way the piece will sit more level on the table and won't be prone to wobbling back and forth. You can check by holding a stick over the floor of your piece. You can see there's just a little bit of air space right in the middle. That will mean that this cup is going to sit out here in the outer part of the foot ring, which is exactly what I want. You would not want it to be raised in the middle, which would make it wobble back and forth. I know I have a little bit more thickness here I can afford to trim off. And you really want to trim off any extra weight possible. Every extra ounce of clay you want to trim off. Realize that when these cups are filled with liquid, they're going to be a lot heavier than they are right now, especially if you're asking someone to grasp it by a handle that's sticking out from the side. There's leverage that's involved in getting them to like hoist the weight of the beverage up to their mouth. So you want to make that whole process as easy for them as possible. You do not want any extra weight in the cup because the clay wall or floor is too thick. So if you can afford to trim some off, do it. This middle area is getting kind of thin. As I press in with my thumbs, I can really feel it flex under just slight pressure from my thumb. So I'm not going to trim any more away from that center area. And I feel like this bottom area is where I want it to be also. The only thing I'm going to do left to finish this is put a little bit of compression on the exact corner of it. Lots of times this bottom corner will get kind of thin and kind of sharp. And so I'm just going to slightly press in with my fingertip and give a more compressed, rounded edge. I'm going to come across the entire surface that I've trimmed and apply a little bit of moisture and go over it all with my fingers. Sometimes I'll use a slightly damp rubber rib. I'm going to smooth back over all the scratchy, rough surface that trimming leaves, especially in this bottom area. This is where my signature is going to go. I want that to look finished. Right here in this corner, it's like the foot of the piece right here is where it enters the world in a way, where it makes physical contact with the table. So I certainly want that to be clean. This bottom curved area is a spot where people often put their fingers while they're using the cup. I want that to be nice and smooth. With this cup, I'm going to trim a foot on the bottom that meets the cup at an angle. So I'm holding the blade of this trimming tool at an angle. I really like the sharp geometry of this piece, and I want to bring a sense of a more defined geometry to the bottom foot also. I'm going to put a little bit more definition in the ridges down here I can make with my trimming tool. So here I'm using the corner of this trimming tool to make a noticeable groove in the piece to bring a little bit more sharpness to the foot. Again, using the corner right in there to really define and create a sense of separateness from the body of the cup to the foot part of it. I can even use the corner of this tool and, come further onto some of these surfaces and give an extra little ridge. I can put an extra little ridge here too and really give the user something more to interact with on their fingers on the bottom part of this piece. I still don't want it to be too sharp, so I'm slightly going over it with my fingers to soften those edges just a little bit. This bottom part of the floor of my cup is a little uneven from where I cut it off of the board. So I'm really gonna have to clench up here to trim a level foot. I've got a white knuckle grip on this tool and my left hand is holding on to my right hand. Start at the bullseye and just hold there in the middle for several revolutions. And then with a super tight grip, slowly come out. Don't let any unevenness of that clay surface bump your hand up in the air. You got to hold steady no matter what. So I can't trim any more right here in the very center part of it because it's getting kind of thin. But I want to have a distinct foot ring on this piece, separate from the rest of the floor. So I am going to come in here just about a ½ inch in from the very edge, and I'm going to cut away some of the clay right there. I'm just making a groove to start, but setting that groove in there And now trimming away a little bit on the inside of it. That's going to leave me a raised ring on the outer part of this foot. I'm even going to come in here on the inside part of the ring and carve away some of that with my trimming tool. I'm going to hold my tool on the inside part of the ring, on the very bottom of the ring, and on the outside part of the ring. So that it's shaped with intention all the way around. With this cup, I'm thinking about continuing the line of the curve as the wall comes down into the foot area. It has this really nice S-curve on it, and I want to just continue that line down into the foot. So I'm getting a sense of what I want that to look like and the particularities of that curve before I attach it on here upside down. I'm going to use the larger of the trimming tools, starting at the corner with a really firm grip. I'm going to sweep the tool down into the body of the cup. And as I sweep it back upwards now, I'm moving the tool in the direction that I want the wall to go. So if I want the wall to come in and be scooped in or a little more concave right there, when I get there with the tool, I'm going to press in with my hand and I'm going to rotate my arm upward at the top like this to leave a little bit of flare at the top. And now as I come down again, I'm going to press in when I get to that ankle area and rotate this tool around the bottom swelling part of that curve. So I'm slowly moving this tool up and down. But as I'm doing it, I'm rotating my arm to make a curve in the bottom part here. I can keep bringing this in and making it more narrow, but you're never going to make it more wide. So I want to get this diameter set before I go on and work with the floor. It's getting pretty thin here, so I'm going to need to stop trimming in that area, but I'm going to make some sweeps across the floor and clean it up. I'm going to take away a little bit more from the bullseye to make the floor slightly concave, and I'm going to lessen up my pressure as I come off of the side. You want to press in on this bottom corner right there. Don't leave that too sharp. It'll just look very unfinished. And if it's very thin and sharp, it will chip over time. So with slightly damp fingers, I'm going to finish that bottom corner, and I'm actually going to come in smooth finish over all the surfaces that I trimmed. You will find that the glazes don't necessarily like to melt as smoothly over the raw, scratchy, pitted surface that trimming can leave behind. If you put the glazes over an area that you've trimmed without smoothing at first, it can leave little blisters and create little air pockets in the glazes themselves. They don't necessarily melt as readily over that scratchy, dry, pocked surface that trimming can leave behind. It'll often show in the finished glazes. So I definitely want to come and smooth out over the entire area that I've trimmed. The traditional technique for making handles is called pulling a handle. And we're going to pull or wet stroke the clay into a handle shape, and we do it this way because it can leave the surface of the handle looking just like the surface of a wheel thrown pot. So it is more sympathetic for in keeping with the piece that it's attached onto. I usually like to start with a piece of clay about the size, I don't know, this is maybe the size of like a lime, kind of a small amount of clay, and I'm gonna start with it in this tapered cone shape. This part of getting ready to pull the handle is similar to centering the clay when throwing, in that I'm getting all the lumps and bumps out you want to do this in a tapered cone shape. It's kind of like a short carrot. And I'm going to hold the fat part of the carrot in my left hand. And this left hand grip on the fat part of the carrot is going to stay dry. This whole fat part on top is just a big handle or a wad of clay for you to hang on to. This is the part that I'm going to make the handle out of. Before I start to pull the handle out of this bottom part of it, I'm going to slightly flatten it out so it's not totally round like a carrot. I'm just going to set it down and tamp it out flat with the heel of my hand on both sides. In this flattened out carrot, sometimes I think of this as like a dog's tongue is the shape that I'm going to start with. Now, of course, you might need larger clay. You might want to start with this wider. If you have some really wide cups, this is a pretty wide cup, and I feel like it could actually use a wider handle on it. This cup would not be appropriate to have a skinny little teacup handle on it. So you want to think about the dimensions of your handle a bit, how wide you want it to be, how long you want the run of it to extend, and all of that is going to inform the size and shape of this carrot that you start to pull the handle with. You can use more clay than this or less. This is just kind of a generic way to start. I'm going to hold this in my left hand, keeping the top part of the carrot dry so I can get a good grip on it. And then my right hand is going to totally slather water all over this. Sometimes I'll just take it and dunk it in water. It should be as wet as if you were throwing with this clay on the wheel. Sometimes I'll hold my hand in kind of a flattened oval shape. Sometimes I'll hold it in this A-OK shape. And I'm going to get the handle part of the clay in that part of my hand and wet stroke it down. Every time I lengthen it, I'm also making it thinner. This is comparable to that part in throwing where we're pulling the clay up in the air and making it thinner and making the pot taller. I go back and forth and I alternate or flip this handle because I tend to pull them very crooked. If I didn't do that, what I notice tends to happen is that I wind up pulling something that starts to get a curve in it like that, which is not what I want for my handle. But I find that flipping it, I'm able to keep it more straight and symmetrical. Once you get to about this thinness, you want to really be aware of how thin you're making it and that you have the right amount of length to make a large enough handle for what you want. If you want more length, I've got more extra clay up here in the top part, and I can probably go up there and coax or stretch or pull and get a little bit more of that thickness of clay down into the body of the handle. You can adjust the pressure that your right hand applies as you come down. I'm not using the same amount of pressure throughout. I'm squeezing harder at the top, and at the bottom I'm just kind of letting go. It's very common to get kind of a thicker bulb at the bottom and a real thin area right above it. Let me exaggerate that a bit. Something like this, how I would deal with it would be to just rip off that bottom part and put it aside. I always pull a longer amount of handle than what I'm going to need, and I may wind up just using a segment of this long strap. Once you feel like you have a long enough segment and it's the right thickness that you want, go ahead and set it aside on a board. I like to set mine like this on the table surface, and I just let the handle kind of flop over and make a natural curve. And I'm going to let it firm up just a little bit. Handles do tend to dry really quickly because they're so thin. I might just let these sit for a half an hour, maybe as much as an hour. It's very helpful if you can start with this wad of clay as close to the shape and size as what you want your handle to be. I'm going to start with this a little bit thicker than what I want so I can do some final thinning out with those wet pulling strokes, but as even and controlled and smooth and bump free as you can have this plug when you start pulling. It's going to make the pulling process that much easier. Get all of this bottom part of the plug of clay super wet while keeping a dry grip with it on the top with your left hand. When I come in to pull, I do like to catch the side edges of it in this webbing part of my hand to keep this rounded and smooth. I'm going to do some pulls on the front and some pulls on the back and go back and forth using lots of water. An alternative pulling hand position is to use the first 2 fingers of your right hand. I call this a scissors pull, and I'm going to get the handle clay in there and come down on it that way. Most people pull though with some variation of holding their hand in an oval shape. You might start to notice the ridges and grooves and bumps that your hand leaves as it strokes down the clay. Everyone has a unique pattern of knuckles and finger pad divots on that part of their hand. And so as you pull it down the clay, you start to get ridges and bumps and grooves in certain areas on here, and that can be a wonderful aspect to your handles. It's the equivalent of having throwing rings on the side walls of your cups. People are going to love to hold on to those ridges, and it's like they are holding your hand. Literally, you're making this imprint in the clay of the handle for someone else to put their hand into. So don't shy away from having some unique striations or grooves on your handle. That can be the best part of your cup. It can bring a lot of activity to the surface. It can be a wonderful feature. You just want to make sure that you don't have any ridges that are too sharp. You don't want any sharp edges or corners on your handles. If you find that you're getting a sharp ridge, like I have in the middle right there, you want to go ahead and just smooth that down a little bit. When somebody puts their hand on the handle that you've made and the cup is filled with liquid, it's going to be kind of heavy. And if there's any sort of a sharp ridge on there at all, it will dig into the person's hand who's using it, and you can make something that's inadvertently really uncomfortable to use. So just make sure that there's no sharp ridges on your handle. You want to keep pulling it down until you feel like it's the right thinness. It can be really common to get an area that's too thin, like this, and it might break. That's okay. I've got enough thickness up above. I can go up there and coax some more of that clay down into the handle. It's also really common to pull at first handle shapes that are really uneven, that have glitches in them from not applying an even stroke of pressure as you come down. If I get a glitch in a handle like that, I'm just going to go ahead and pinch that off and continue pulling the rest of the thickness that I have above it, or just start over. This does take a little bit of practice. I recommend that everybody practice at least 4 handles before you think about attaching them onto your cups. Don't attach onto your cups the very first handles that you ever made. You'll be able to make nicer ones with just a little bit of practice. It can make a huge difference. Once you get the hang of this, it doesn't take long to pull a handle at all. It might only take you seriously 5 minutes. So go ahead and pull a bunch and let them set up on a board, and then you can decide which ones you want to use. To attach the handle on here, I'm going to start by deciding where I want it to go. There's going to be an upper and a lower attachment point. And so I'm going to hold the cup out away from me and look at the profile of it and really consider where I want those attachment points to be and what shape I want the handle to be in. I'm definitely going to make shaped handles that complement the shape of the cup. It's a framing device, and this cup is a great example to think about framing in the neck area and framing this lower part of the curve also by having a curved handle come alongside it. I'm going to make a handle that tucks right into this neck area up here to start. I'm going to prep the two attachment points where the handle is going to go by slipping and scoring. I scratch it up with my pin tool and get a little bit of water in those scratch marks with a wet finger and go back and do it again. You want to go back and forth multiple times. It's really important that your handles are well attached. Slip and score thoroughly. Go in deeply with your pin tool. Scratch into the wall of clay, not just only on the surface, but dig in. Go back and forth in multiple different directions. I like to work with clay handles when they've just barely started to firm up. So the earliest stages of cheese hard, you can see that this clay is still really pliable, but it's firmed up enough, just barely, so that I can softly touch it on the surface without leaving a mark on it. For me, that's the perfect amount of stiffness for working with these handles. I'm going to start by cutting off this big wad of clay at the head of it. All of that is going to be excess that I'm not going to use. I'm going to start to get this up against the side of the cup and fine-tune the curve. If you've let your handles get too stiff and you try to bend it, you will start to see them crack. And if you start to see or feel that happen even a little bit, you should just get rid of that particular handle, cast it aside, recycle that clay, and make a new one. With this particular attachment, I want this handle to come up in the air before it meets the cup down at the bottom. I want the handle to attach on the front face right here. I'm actually going to cut this end of it then on kind of a bevel. I'm cutting this on an angle to fit more snugly into the neck area of the cup. I often like my handles to have a little bit of an uplift on them, to give them more energy, to make the piece seem a little lighter, to make the whole cup seem a little more responsive, a little more active, a little more like it's asking somebody to put their hand in there and pick it up. I've got some excess clay down at the bottom also, and I'm going to go ahead and trim that back now too before I really attach it on here. So to really attach it now, I'm going to press the handle into the score marks with my other hand on the inside of the cup, so that as I'm pressing it, I'm not distorting the cup itself. I'm going to shimmy the handle back and forth into the score marks that I made. And I'm going to make sure that the clay in the handle is engaged with and pushed down into the score marks on the side wall of the cup. I'm pushing firmly here, but I have my other hand inside the cup so that I'm pressing against it without damaging the cup itself. I find that when people come and smear this all in place and try and blend it in, they end up whittling away the attachment clay, and it just becomes really thin and makes a mess pretty quickly. I find the best thing to do is just leave it alone. Push it in. Maybe I'll round this bottom part of the tab a little bit with my finger so it's not too sharp. And that's it. If I have some stray score marks on the side, I might come and clean them up with the tip of my wooden knife. If you have a little corner area that you can't quite reach into, sometimes a paintbrush is a nice smoothing tool to help get in tight corners. Right here might be a nice place to use your stamp if it fits. Here's a handle I pulled where I actually put one handle on top of another handle to get this kind of double, really pronounced ridge effect in the center of it. I wanted something a little thicker, maybe a little more pizzazz in the handle, maybe something with a little more activity going on in the handle clay to bring some more action to this cup. I noticed though when I set it on a curve that I got a little crease right here in it, and there's kind of a thin spot right there. So I'm going to choose to pinch it off right there and just save this extra thick soft clay for something later. And I'm just going to use this bottom section. That's kind of a big handle, or at least it sticks out kind of far. Realize the farther out your handles stick, the more prone they'll be to breaking, whether it happens this quarter while we're trying to get them fired, or it might happen, a couple years from now when you're knocking it around in your kitchen. So handles sticking out really far can be fun, but you will make safer handles if they are in tighter to the sidewall of your cup. I like the shape of this coming out in kind of a straight horizontal C shape, but there's so many different profiles for the handle I could choose. I could make it come up in more of a teardrop shape. I could even have it connect to the very top of the cup. This might be interesting if I wanted to, say, hang it from a cup hook. I feel like this cup has gotten a little drier than what I wanted. It's thin, it's large, and it's just been sitting out exposed to the air for the past half hour I've been working. It's already gotten kind of dry. I'm going to do kind of a dramatic hydration procedure on here. I'm going to take the whole top part of it and just dunk it in water really quickly. Hold the cup upside down for the next minute or so, and any drips of water are going to come off of it. You would not want to do that and then just set it like this and have water puddle down and have a standing puddle of water down on the inside of your pot. That could make it crack over time. But if things are getting a little too dry and you just want to really hydrate them, you can usually do a quick dip like that if you're careful with it. I'm going to go back and forth, slipping and scoring on these two attachment points about a dozen times. Don't be afraid to make a mess at this stage. You can always come back and clean up the surface later. It's much better to do it that way and make sure that you have a secure handle attachment. Sometimes the spot where the handle attaches to the cup just seems kind of thin. Seems a little tenuous. This handle still sticks out really far, and it's a big cup and it's going to be pretty heavy when it's filled with liquid. And even though that might be attached well enough, I feel the need to go around both of these two attachment points with an extra thin coil of clay for security's sake. Sometimes using extra attachment clay around the handle is actually about making a more secure physical bond between the handle and the cup, and sometimes it's just more of a visual cue to the end user that this handle is well attached. With this cup right now, it just looks a little precarious, and putting some extra clay to thicken it up at these two attachment points will really help give a sense of confidence and comfort with somebody picking it up by the handle and using it as I intend. I've rolled out a small coil of clay here, and I'm just going to go on that inside joint and press some in place on both the upper and the lower attachment. And now I'm going to work this in and blend it in so it makes a more seamless transition. I'm smoothing this in with my thumb to blend in that extra securing attachment clay into the rest of the handle. You can use a little bit of water during this stage, especially if you want to help smooth out the joint to be as smooth as the rest, of the pulled handle. I'll also sometimes use the edge of the wood knife to get in there and smooth that out. Just like I might use the tip of the wood knife to clean up these stray score marks. You really want to make sure that there's no little glitches or crumbs of clay or scratch marks on the handle itself. You want this to be smooth all the way around. Sometimes I find that I've actually attached the handle slightly crooked, although sometimes a crooked handle is more comfortable to hold on to. It's not the look that I want for this cup. I'm gonna straighten this one out a little bit. And on this cup, I'm going to use my stamp down here underneath the handle. You want where your handle attaches onto the cup to be the thickest part of the handle. So I like to have the effect like on this one where the handle actually spreads and gets a little bit wider where it attaches onto the wall of the cup itself. It's kind of a subtle feature of this handle. You might not notice it if I didn't point it out like this, but it really goes far towards giving a sense of security for somebody picking up this object by this handle. And I've made it thicker up here and down below by adding in some extra attachment clay. You can certainly think about how many fingers you want to get inside your handle to use. If you're the kind of person that likes to get their whole hand up against the side of their cup, those are the kinds of things that you can also communicate with the size and the shape of your handles. This is a really interactive part of your pieces. Obviously, this is what you're asking somebody else to literally grasp onto, and you can kind of dictate or manipulate or have fun with that relationship of what you're presenting somebody else to grasp onto. You just don't want it to be painful. And so you don't want to have any sharp ridges on your handles at all. Make sure that they're smooth and rounded, especially on these side edges or going down the middle, that there's nothing sharp that's gonna hurt somebody when they go to pick it up. And you also want to make sure that they're well attached, that you've done a really thorough job of slip and score attaching, that they weren't too dry when you made that attachment. And if it seems like it's necessary, add some more thickening reinforcement clay around the joints of your handles.